There is something within you that you have not yet come to fully know, something that appears in those moments when you achieve something you never thought possible, or when an intuition guides you precisely toward the right decision. That something is your inner genius, a force that doesn't belong to chance or luck, but to the deepest and brightest part of your mind. For years, you've been led to believe that intelligence, creativity, or success are gifts reserved for a few. But that isn't true. You were born with that same power. You've simply learned to ignore it. It's like having a magic lamp in your pocket, but never realizing you can rub it. Imagine for a moment that your mind is an infinite laboratory where each thought is a spark and every emotion a substance reacting with another. In that laboratory, you are the chief scientist, but you've spent too much time repeating the same experiments: fear, doubt, routine. The true genius appears when you dare to mix new formulas, when you turn curiosity into fuel and mistakes into learning. There are no geniuses without curiosity or courage. Talent without action withers like a flower without water. Albert Einstein, who many consider the embodiment of genius, once said, "We are all very ignorant. It's just that we don't all ignore the same things." That sentence contains a powerful truth. Your genius does not manifest because you know everything, but because you dare to explore what you don't. The secret isn't in accumulating knowledge, but in discovering how you think, how you interpret reality, how you connect the dots that others don't see. Every person has their own mental map of the world, and yours could be a masterpiece waiting to be drawn. Think back to when you were a child. Do you remember how effortlessly you imagined, how you played at being an explorer, an inventor, a hero? In those moments, you were using the purest, most creative part of your mind, unafraid of ridicule or mistakes. But over time, you were taught to think like everyone else, to stop asking uncomfortable questions, to fit in. What no one told you is that, by doing so, you began to close the door to the inner laboratory where your genius lived. You didn't lose it, you simply silenced it. There's a curious story about Thomas Edison that illustrates this perfectly. When he was a child, his teacher expelled him from school for intellectual incapacity. His mother, upon reading the letter, told him that the teacher had actually written the opposite, that Edison was a genius too great to be understood at that school. He believed her, and that belief became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Decades later, that incapable boy invented the light bulb, the phonograph, and over 1,000 patents that changed the world. What would have happened if his mother had read the letter as it truly was? Perhaps the genius would have been extinguished before it was born. Sometimes, a single belief is enough to either free or imprison your entire potential. Your mind has the ability to create realities. What you imagine with conviction tends to materialize, not through magic, but through focus. When you believe you can't, your brain unconsciously works to prove you right. But when you believe you can, it activates invisible mechanisms that push you to act, to persist, to find paths where you once saw only walls. That's the difference between someone who resigns and someone who transforms their destiny. It's not about luck, it's about mental programming. The problem is that most people don't know how to talk to their mind. They send it mixed messages. I want success, but I'm afraid of failure. I want love, but I don't feel worthy of it. And the mind, which doesn't judge or reason like you do, simply obeys the dominant emotion. That's why, if your main emotion is fear, you'll attract more reasons to be afraid. If it's confidence, you'll attract opportunities you couldn't see before. Your mind is not your enemy. It's your most loyal servant. But for it to work in your favor, you must first learn how to communicate with it. A fascinating paradox is that the more you try to control your thoughts, the more they control you. It's like trying to calm water by stirring it with your hands. You only make it murkier. True mental mastery doesn't come from force, but from observation. When you learn to observe what you think without identifying with it, you discover something revealing. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who observes them. That simple shift in perspective gives you immense power because it frees you from the mental drama that consumes the creative energy you could be using to build your life. You might think this sounds too abstract, but there are experiments that prove it. In the 1990s, a team of neuroscientists discovered that when a person visualizes an action, say, playing the piano, the same areas of the brain are activated as when they perform it physically. In other words, the brain doesn't clearly distinguish between what you imagine and what you do. This means that every image you repeat in your mind has a real effect on your body, your mood, and your behavior. If you visualize failure, your brain trains for failure. If you visualize success, it trains for success. And although it sounds incredible, that is the root of many mediocre lives. People unknowingly train themselves to fail. I once heard a simple yet powerful story. A gardener planted two identical seeds in different parts of his land. One grew tall and strong, the other withered. The difference was that one received plenty of sunlight and water, while the other remained under constant shade. Your mind works the same way. Every thought you water with attention grows. If you feed it fear, doubt, and complaints, your mental garden fills with weeds. But if you feed it enthusiasm, curiosity, and purpose, a genius blooms within you. You cannot choose the weather, but you can choose where to plant your ideas. True mental power doesn't lie in forced positive thinking, but in conscious thinking. Instead of fighting your negative thoughts, observe them. Ask where they come from and what they want to teach you. Sometimes fear isn't an enemy, it's a messenger, warning you that you're about to step outside your comfort zone. Listen to it, but don't kneel before it. The inner genius doesn't eliminate fear, it uses it as a compass. If something fills you with both fear and excitement, that's probably exactly where you need to go. Within you lies potential that has not yet been used. It isn't measured by your age, education, or past achievements, but by your ability to believe in yourself and to act even when you don't have all the answers. The genius within your mind doesn't shout, it whispers. And if you learn to listen, it will show you paths that once seemed impossible. But it won't appear while you wait for perfect conditions. It appears when you decide to move, even if you don't feel ready. Every step you take toward your purpose awakens a dormant part of you. Every attempt, every mistake, every new thought expands the territory where your genius can manifest. And in that moment, when you discover that power doesn't come from outside, but from within, you begin to see the world with new eyes. You realize that everything you were searching for, motivation, inspiration, answers, was waiting for you in your own mind. You just needed the courage to believe it. The genius that lives within you is not a mental trick or a romantic idea. It is a real, tangible capacity waiting to be activated. Yet it doesn't awaken through magic formulas, but through a deep understanding of how your mind works and how it is nourished. Many people spend their lives believing that thinking more means thinking better, when in reality, genius doesn't arise from an excess of thoughts, but from clarity. Your mind is like a crystal. The cleaner it is from noise, the more intensely it reflects light. And that light is consciousness, the attention you choose to place on what truly matters. The secret isn't in doing more, but in learning to focus better. Attention is the brush with which you paint your reality. Everything you look at constantly grows. If you focus on your problems, they expand. If you focus on your possibilities, they expand as well. That's the difference between a trained mind and a scattered one. You don't need more intelligence. You need to direct the intelligence you already have toward where it will help you evolve. The inner genius is not a gift. It's an invisible discipline. The discipline of keeping your attention on what builds rather than on what destroys. There's a psychological curiosity that proves this. In a famous study called the focus effect, researchers showed that people who concentrated on a single goal without being distracted by external stimuli increased their cognitive performance by up to 30%. That means the simple act of training your mind not to wander has transformative power. Your genius isn't asleep, it's scattered. What you need isn't to awaken it, but to gather it, to focus its energy. And that is achieved by cultivating presence, that state in which your mind stops drifting between past and future and settles fully into the now. Presence is the key that opens the door to genius. When you are completely here, ideas flow, connections multiply, and creativity becomes natural. Have you noticed how your best ideas appear in the shower, during a walk, or just before sleep? It's no coincidence. In those moments, your mind relaxes, stops resisting, and the unconscious, that hidden part where your genius lives, begins to speak. But in the constant noise of social media, notifications, and hurry, that voice can barely be heard. If you want to hear it, you must create silence, not physical silence, but mental. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said, "A man's character is his destiny, but what few mention is that character is formed by the thoughts you repeat every day. Each thought is a seed, each emotion a fertilizer. If every morning you tell yourself you can't, you are programming your destiny with the voice of fear. If you tell yourself you can learn, grow, and move forward, your mind begins to build paths to confirm it. The inner genius doesn't work with doubt, it works with conviction. That's why every deep transformation begins with the way you talk to yourself. Self-talk, that constant internal dialogue you have with yourself, is one of the most powerful tools in existence, though most people don't use it consciously. You talk to yourself more than you talk to anyone else, and what you tell yourself determines what you believe is possible. There's a big difference between saying, "I'm not good at this," and "I'm not good at this yet." That single word, yet, opens a mental door that was once closed. The genius within you feeds on those cracks of possibility. Where others see a wall, you can see a gap. Let me tell you a true story. During World War II, a group of engineers worked desperately to improve the resistance of planes returning damaged from combat. They analyzed the areas with the most bullet holes and reinforced those parts. But a statistician named Abraham Wald had a contrary idea. He said they shouldn't reinforce where the holes were, but where they weren't, because the planes that returned showed the hits they could withstand. The ones that didn't come back were hit in the untouched areas. That change in perspective saved thousands of lives. Your mind works the same way. Genius appears when you dare to look where no one looks, when you ask the question no one asks. We often confuse intelligence with accumulating data or solving complex problems, but inner genius isn't about that. It's about seeing the invisible, connecting what seems disconnected. Leonardo da Vinci didn't just paint, he observed nature with childlike curiosity, dissected bodies, studied the flight of birds, and blended art and science as if they were one. His genius wasn't a supernatural gift, it was total attention to the world and to himself. You too can develop that vision if you learn to observe without judgment, with wonder, with openness. There is something magical about observing with presence. Everything transforms. When you look at a problem without fear, it ceases to be a threat and becomes a challenge. When you observe an emotion without trying to eliminate it, it loses power over you. The genius doesn't fight reality, it interprets it, and by doing so, transforms it. That is one of the essential differences between the reactive mind and the creative mind. The former acts from fear, the latter from possibility. Both states exist within you, waiting for you to choose which one to feed. An interesting paradox is that true genius doesn't seek to stand out, but to understand. While many want to be admired, the genius wants to comprehend. That pure curiosity takes them further than any empty ambition ever could. If you look at the most brilliant people in history, you'll see a common pattern. They all loved to learn. They didn't do it to impress others, but out of fascination for discovering how the universe, the mind, or the human soul works. That passion for learning is the spark that keeps genius alive. No matter your age or experience, if you keep curiosity alive, you will never stop evolving. There's a phrase attributed to Michelangelo in his old age, ancora imparo, I am still learning. He was over 80 when he said it. What does that tell us? That genius is not a destination, but a state of continuous exploration. The day you believe you know everything, your mind closes. But the day you recognize that you can always learn something new, the genius awakens and breathes again. Humility, far from being a weakness, is the noblest doorway to knowledge. Sometimes the inner genius doesn't express itself through great inventions or discoveries, but through everyday life, in how you solve a problem creatively, in how you find calm amid chaos, in how you help others see what they cannot. Genius doesn't always seek fame, it seeks purpose. It is the part of you that wants to contribute something to the world, even if no one applauds. When you act from that place, the universe seems to conspire in your favor, not because it's mystical, but because your thoughts, emotions, and actions align in the same direction. That's called coherence, and coherence is the signature of genius. Your mind has immense power, but it needs direction. If you don't guide it, it will guide you. If you don't decide what to think, others will. Society, the news, trends, the opinions of others. Liberating your inner genius means taking back control of your attention and your beliefs. It means daring to think for yourself, even if it separates you from the majority. Because genius doesn't seek approval, it seeks truth. And the deepest truth you can discover is this: everything you need to transform your life is already within you, waiting for you to decide to use it. The awakening of that genius doesn't happen in an instant, but through a series of small moments in which you choose to act consciously. Every time you choose calm over reaction, curiosity over judgment, learning over fear, the genius within you steps forward. You don't need to become someone different, only to remember who you were before you forgot your power. Now that you know genius is not a myth, but a real faculty that sleeps within your mind, it's time to understand how it manifests in practice. It's not enough to believe you have it. You must allow it to express itself, and for that, you first need to unlearn. Yes, unlearn. Because most of the limits that hold you back don't come from what you don't know, but from what you take for granted. You've learned to doubt yourself, to underestimate your ideas, to wait for external approval before trusting your intuition. Awakening your inner genius means dismantling those old beliefs one by one until the mind is free enough to think for itself. The true obstacle to genius is not ignorance, but mental rigidity. When you believe things can only be done in one way, you close the door to innovation. But when you accept that what you know might not be all there is, something within you expands. Your brain is a plastic organ, capable of reorganizing itself every time you challenge it. Each time you learn something new, new neural connections are created. Every time you dare to see a problem from a different perspective, mental pathways that were once dormant become stronger. It's as if you were turning on lights in rooms of your mind that had been dark for years. There's a fascinating story about a man named Henry Molaison, known in neuroscience as Patient HM. After undergoing surgery to treat his epilepsy, he lost the ability to form new conscious memories. However, scientists discovered something astonishing. Although he couldn't remember learning a task, each time he repeated it, he performed it better. His body was learning without his mind knowing it. This finding changed our understanding of the human brain. It proved that there are unconscious layers of learning, a kind of hidden intelligence that operates beyond memory or logic. And that's precisely where your genius lives, in that deep zone within you that knows more than your rational mind can explain. Intuition, so often underestimated, is one of the clearest manifestations of that power. It's not magic or superstition, it's the result of millions of mental connections working silently, synthesizing information your conscious mind has not yet processed. When something tells you to take one path or avoid another, it isn't a mysterious voice. It's your higher mind communicating with you. But to hear it, you need trust. Intuition doesn't shout, it whispers. If you don't trust yourself, if your mind is filled with noise, you lose it among repetitive thoughts. Trusting your intuition is like tuning an antenna. The cleaner it is, the clearer the signal. The inner genius also feeds on imagination, not empty fantasy, but the ability to visualize what doesn't yet exist. Everything we now consider real, a phone, a city, a song, a bridge, was once an image in someone's mind. To imagine is not to escape the world, but to design it before building it. When you visualize a possible future with enough clarity and emotion, you're creating a mental blueprint your brain will try to turn into experience. It's no coincidence that elite athletes practice visualization before competing. Their minds train their bodies to execute precisely what they've already rehearsed internally. You can use the same principle for any goal in your life. There's a phrase by Nikola Tesla that summarizes this brilliantly. If you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Every thought, emotion, and word emits a frequency that influences your surroundings and even your biology. Science has already shown that positive mental states strengthen the immune system, enhance creativity, and expand perception. When you think with fear, you contract. When you think with love, you expand. Genius cannot flourish in a tense or defeated mind. That's why caring for what you feel and think is not a matter of superficial optimism. It's mental hygiene. Just as you clean your body, you must clean your mind of toxic thoughts and repeated emotions that merely take up space. A curious anecdote tells that the sculptor Auguste Rodin was once visited by a young apprentice who asked him how he sculpted such perfect figures. Rodin smiled and replied, "I don't sculpt figures. I only remove from the block of marble everything that is not part of them." That answer holds a profound metaphor for your own inner process. Genius is not something added from the outside, it's revealed from within when you remove what you are not. Fear, doubt, comparison, guilt. Beneath all that lies your pure essence, your brilliant mind, your untouched potential. Freeing your genius isn't about building something new, but about clearing away what hides it. Freeing your genius isn't about building something new, but about clearing away what hides it. Another fundamental element in this awakening is emotion. Emotion is the fuel of the mind. You can have the greatest ideas, but without emotion, there is no movement. The great visionaries weren't just thinkers. They were passionate. They deeply felt what they imagined. That emotional intensity is what turns an idea into action, a vision into reality. When what you do moves you, the genius acts through you. And you don't have to wait for the big idea to feel that way. Just put your heart into what you do today. The mind of the genius doesn't distinguish between big and small, only between what is done consciously and what is done by inertia. Sometimes, genius manifests in the most difficult moments. It's in adversity that your mind is forced to break its usual patterns and seek new solutions. Pain, though no one desires it, has an extraordinary capacity for mental expansion. Many of the greatest masterpieces, discoveries, and inventions in history were born from suffering, not because pain is good, but because it awakens the search. When you learn to see your wounds as teachers rather than punishments, the genius begins to speak to you in a different language, the language of resilience. There is no deeper wisdom than that which is forged by walking through darkness without losing faith in the light. And here arises an essential principle. Whatever you believe, you create. If you believe you are incapable, you unconsciously act as someone who is. If you believe you can, you activate resources that were dormant. Your mind becomes either the most powerful or the most dangerous tool, depending on the direction you give it. But remember, you cannot control what you think. You can only choose which thoughts you give power to. The genius within you chooses wisely. The ordinary mind reacts without awareness. There is an account from Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps. Amid the horror, he discovered that those who maintained a reason to live, a goal, a purpose, a sense, endured longer than those who surrendered to emptiness. From that experience came his most famous quote, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That is the highest expression of human genius, the ability to choose how to think and feel, even when all seems lost. If you can choose your attitude, you can choose your destiny." Your inner genius doesn't seek to eliminate challenges, it seeks to use them as stepping stones. Every obstacle trains you, every fall teaches you. When you stop fearing mistakes, fear loses its power and freedom appears. And that mental freedom is the ground where genius blooms. There is no greatness without risk, no growth without discomfort. But if you look back, you'll see that the moments in which you grew the most were those when you dared to step outside the mold. Discomfort is the border where the limited mind ends and the creative mind begins. In the end, it all comes down to a decision: to keep living from the mind that repeats, or to begin living from the mind that creates. Genius doesn't reveal itself all at once. It unfolds each time you choose to think differently, to feel with awareness, and to act with purpose. You don't need to change who you are, only to remember who you can become. Because within you lies a universe waiting for your permission to manifest. And when that genius awakens, nothing is ever the same. You see the world through the eyes of someone who knows reality is malleable, that limits are only mental agreements, and that life, at its core, is a canvas waiting for you to choose the colors. You may not see it clearly today, but believe me, your mind is not a simple instrument. It's a factory of miracles, an antenna that both receives and transmits possibilities. And the genius that dwells within it doesn't need you to believe in it to exist. It only needs you to stop doubting. Because in the instant you decide to trust, in the moment you choose to act, in the second you move from thinking to living, that genius awakens, smiles, and takes control. And then you understand everything. You were never lacking power. You were only lacking belief.